What if the main tool we use to see how the world is connected is actually, well, making our vision worse? Today, we're diving into a really powerful argument that says social network analysis, a method that's supposed to map out global relationships, is often being used in a way that completely strips out the most important part, the social. For decades, researchers have been using network analysis to get at this exact question. But here's the twist. A major critique argues that a lot of the recent work is built on some really shaky ground. Shaky enough that it might be blurring our view of global politics instead of making it sharper. Okay, here's how we're going to break this all down. First up, we'll talk about the big promise of this tool that's made a huge comeback. Then we get into the juicy stuff, how the social gets lost, and this problem called data fracking. And finally, we'll look at how we can fix it and why thinking about relationships changes, well, pretty much everything. So let's start with this tool. And honestly, it's not brand new, but it has absolutely exploded back onto the scene in world politics. And it came with this radical promise of a totally new way to see power and influence. Right, so SNA isn't just some buzzword. It's a really rigorous way to look at the world. Instead of seeing a bunch of separate countries, you see this complex, interconnected social web. The whole focus shifts from the individual players to the connections between them. We're talking trade, alliances, diplomatic ties, all the stuff that really defines the system. And you can see from this timeline, SNA has this long, almost forgotten history here. The early pioneers totally saw its potential, but then it just kind of faded away. Its huge comeback after 2000 was all about new computers and big data. But this is also where the problems really started to creep in, as people took some deeply flawed shortcuts. And that brings us right to the heart of the problem. In this huge rush to use these powerful new digital tools, the most important part of the whole analysis, the social stuff, the actual meaning behind the relationships, is getting left behind. It's being stripped away. So where is it all going wrong? Well, the critique points to three really common mistakes, you could even call them bad habits, that have snuck into the research. And each one shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes this kind of analysis so powerful in the first place. Okay, the first mistake is a really big one, assuming connections exist instead of actually measuring them. So, for example, a study might say two countries are tied just because they're both democracies. That's a huge leap of faith, right? Just because they share a quality doesn't mean they actually have a relationship. You've got to measure the real, tangible stuff, the actual interactions. The second mistake is taking this incredibly rich, relational idea and just boiling it down to a single number. I mean, the whole point of SNA is that a country's power comes from its specific spot in the network. But a lot of studies just calculate a centrality score, which is basically just a popularity contest number, and treat it like any other stat, like GDP. In doing that, you completely erase the network context, which is the whole reason you started. And this quote just illustrates the problem perfectly. The author calls it a shotgun wedding. You're forcing this new, sophisticated relational tool to serve these old, individual-focused theories. It's an unnatural fit, and the results are often pretty weak and not very convincing. And this misuse of the tool gets even worse. It happens when ideas from physics and this network science boom are just slapped onto social data without any real care for the context. This leads to a problem that the author gives a very memorable name. And that name is poorly theorized data fracking. It's just like it sounds. It's this practice of digging into huge data sets just to find some surface-level pattern, while completely ignoring all the rich, meaningful social context underneath, the history, the politics, the culture, all the stuff that actually explains why the network looks the way it does. And this finding just demolishes the hype. A huge claim from the network science boom was that most networks are scale-free, where a few big hubs have tons of connections and everyone else has very few. But when someone actually checked, it turns out it's incredibly rare. Only 4% of networks really fit this model. And get this, no social networks studied were found to be strongly scale-free. 0. This quote from network scientist Duncan Watts, who's a physicist himself, really gets to the heart of it. See, when you're studying human society, you have to be fussy. You have to care deeply about meaning and context. When you don't, your analysis becomes shallow. You end up mistaking some elegant math for an actual social truth. So is it all bad news? No, not at all. Luckily, there's a new wave of research that's leading a course correction. They're putting the social back into social network analysis by going back to basics with way better data and much smarter tools. So, the path forward really comes down to two crucial common sense steps. First, use data that actually measures real relationships. And second, use statistical models that were literally built from the ground up to handle how complex and dynamic social networks really are. So instead of just assuming ties exist, this new research uses these rich historical data sets that track what countries actually do. Who do they officially recognize as a country? Who do they sell weapons to? Who do they trade with? These data sets are all about concrete actions, not just abstract similarities. And to actually analyze all this great data, researchers are using these new models like ERGMs and TRGMs. Now, don't worry about the acronyms. The key thing to know is that these tools are designed to figure out why networks form and change over time. They can test for stuff like reciprocity or popularity, or that tendency for friends of friends to become friends, all the very social processes that the older methods just ignored. And this all brings us to the biggest takeaway. Doing network analysis the right way isn't just about a technical fix. It's a fundamental shift in how we think about the world. It's about moving away from what states are and focusing on what their relationships do. This all points to this really profound idea called relationalism. It's this pretty radical thought that relationships are the actual building blocks of the international system. From this viewpoint, a state's identity and its power aren't things that lead to relationships, they are actively created by them. This is exactly why S&A, when you use it correctly, is so powerful. It gives us the tools to study this fascinating middle ground, what they call the meso-level. We're not just looking at single states anymore, and we're not just looking at some abstract global system. We're looking at that messy, clustered, always changing web of interactions where global politics actually happens. And so that leaves us with one last kind of provocative question to chew on. If relationships really do come first, maybe we need to rethink our most basic assumptions. Maybe the real main character of world politics isn't the individual state at all, but the web of ties that define it, enable it, and constrain it.